The Sunday morning sun in Lagos is a relentless judge. It exposes every crack in the pavement and every bead of sweat on a worried brow. As I stepped off the yellow Danfo bus at the Lekki tollgate, I spent a few seconds adjusting the hem of my skirt. It was a simple navy blue fabric, cut long and wide to hide as much as possible, yet the Lagos wind seemed to conspire against me, pressing the cloth against my hips. I could already feel the weight of the day ahead. I had been a member of the Tabernacle of Grace for 3 years. In those 3 years, I had never missed a Saturday cleaning session. While the wealthy mothers in Israel arrived in their tinted SUVs for 5-minute committee meetings, I was the one who arrived at 6 a.m. I was the one who scrubbed the industrial-sized toilets until my knuckles were raw. I was the one who polished the silver candle holders until they reflected my exhausted, hidden face. I served not because I wanted their praise, but because I believed that in the house of God, I was more than just a girl from the slums who had lost everything in a fire 10 years ago. "Sister Catherine, move aside. You're blocking the VIP walkway with your brooding," a sharp voice snapped. It was Sister Martha, the head of the ushering department. She was draped in a gold-embroidered buba that probably cost more than my 6 months' rent. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and profound irritation. To her, I wasn't the dedicated worker who had stayed late the night before to mop the choir loft. I was a sanctuary distraction. "I'm sorry, Ma," I said, stepping onto the grass. "I was just catching my breath." "Catch it elsewhere," she hissed, her eyes scanning my body with a look of pure condemnation. "And why is your head wrap so small? You know the pastor spoke about sisters who try to look modern to trap the brothers. With a body like yours, Catherine, you should be draped in a sack, not trying to blend in with the virtuous." I felt the familiar sting in my chest, the hot, rising shame that had become my Sunday ritual. I walked into the sanctuary, the air conditioning hitting my face like a block of ice. The church was a palace of marble and glass, built on the foundations of prosperity and grace. I found my usual spot, not in the front where the tithe-heavy members sat on velvet cushions, but in the back, tucked behind a pillar where the ushers usually stood. As the service began, the music was deafening. The praise team, dressed in shimmering white, sang about breakthroughs and divine favor. I closed my eyes, trying to find a connection to the God I loved, but the whispers around me were louder than the drums. "Is that her? The one deaconess Eniola called a Jezebel? Look at how she's sitting. Even her posture is an invitation to sin." I gripped my Bible until my fingers turned white. They didn't know that my inviting body was a prison of genetics I never asked for. They didn't know that under my sleeves were the faint, silver scars of a fire that should have killed me. They only saw the church outcast, the girl who worked in the shadows but was too loud in her physical presence to be truly holy. Suddenly, the music died down to a low, ominous hum. Pastor Ezekiel stepped onto the gold-plated podium. He didn't start with a prayer. He didn't start with a greeting. He looked directly into the camera that broadcast his image to the giant LED screens, and then his gaze shifted. He looked toward the back. He looked at the pillar. He looked at me. "There is a cancer in this sanctuary today," he began, his voice dropping into a terrifying, theatrical bass. "A daughter of perdition who thinks she can hide her worldly spirit behind my pews. Ushers, bring the one I'm looking at to the front. It is time we stop pretending that beauty is a substitute for modesty." My heart stopped. The 3,000 people in the room turned as one, their eyes like 1,000 needles pricking my skin. This was the beginning of the end of my silence. To understand why the pastor's insults felt like salt rubbed into an open wound, you have to understand the night the world turned into a furnace. 10 years ago, the third mainland bridge wasn't just a road for me, it was my workplace. I was 19, carrying a crate of bottled water on my head, weaving through the gridlock of Lagos traffic while the sky threatened to collapse under the weight of an impending storm. My mother was 20 yards ahead of me, her voice a constant anchor as she called out to the commuters. "Catherine, watch your step. "The rain is starting," she yelled over the roar of 1,000 idling engines. The rain didn't just fall, it arrived with a vengeance, turning the asphalt into a black, treacherous mirror. The traffic began to clear, cars accelerating as the bottleneck opened up. That was when I heard it, the high-pitched scream of tires losing their battle with the wet road. A silver SUV, moving with the reckless speed of someone who thought they owned the world, hydroplaned. It spun like a top, a blur of expensive metal and glass, before slamming into the concrete divider. The impact sounded like a bomb. The vehicle flipped, sliding on its roof for 50 feet, sparks showering the darkness like dying stars. It came to a rest in a heap of twisted machinery right where my mother had been standing seconds before. "Mama!" I shrieked, dropping my crate. Plastic bottles scattered across the bridge like discarded shells. The SUV began to groan. A thin, terrifying lick of orange flame danced near the ruptured fuel tank. I ran toward the wreckage, my heart a frantic drum in my ears. I reached the spot where the car had stopped, and my world shattered. My mother was pinned beneath the rear of the heavy vehicle. Her eyes were open, looking at me with a lucidity that terrified me. "Catherine," she wheezed, blood bubbling at the corner of her mouth. "But it will blow. I can't leave you." I clawed at the metal, the heat already beginning to sear the hair on my arms. "Help him," she whispered, her gaze shifting to the driver's side, where a young man's arm hung limp out of a shattered window. "Save a life, Catherine. Go." I looked at the driver. He was barely older than I was, his face masked in blood and powdered glass from the airbag. The fire was growing, a hungry beast devouring the engine block. I had a choice that no human should ever have to make. I looked at my mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to keep me fed, and she gave me a tiny, resolute nod. It was a command. I threw my weight against the driver's door. It was jammed, the frame warped by the force of the flip. I didn't have the strength of a man, but I had the desperation of a daughter fulfilling a dying wish. I grabbed a jagged piece of the concrete divider and smashed what was left of the window. The heat was a physical wall, blistering my skin as I reached inside to unbuckle the man. "Wake up!" I screamed, slapping his cold cheek. "You have to move." He groaned, his eyes fluttering open for a split second, a deep, piercing brown that I would never forget. I grabbed him under the armpits, dragging him through the broken glass. My muscles screamed, my lungs filling with acrid, black smoke. I hauled him 20, 30, 40 feet away, my feet slipping on the wet bitumen. The explosion was a wall of sound and light that threw us both forward. I landed hard, the air driven from my body. When I turned back, the SUV was a mountain of fire. My mother was gone. There was no more screaming, no more whispering, just the roar of the gasoline and the hiss of the rain. I sat there in the middle of the bridge, cradling the stranger's head in my lap. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just watched the fire, knowing that the most precious thing in my life had been exchanged for the life of this boy. By the time the sirens arrived, I had slipped away into the shadows of the lower embankment. I didn't want a medal. I didn't want to be interviewed. I was a girl with no family left, no home, and a heart that had been incinerated. I watched from a distance as the paramedics loaded him into an ambulance. Weeks later, I saw his face on a billboard. Billionaire Uzor, the miracle survivor. He was hailed as a golden boy, a tech genius who had been saved by an angel of the bridge. He became a billionaire, a philanthropist, and the pillar of the very church I now sat in. He didn't know that his miracle was paid for in my mother's blood and the scars I still wore on my back. He didn't know that the angel he was looking for was the same woman his pastor was currently calling a Jezebel in front of thousands. I had remained a ghost for 10 years, working in the church's laundry and cleaning their floors, watching Gabriel from the back of the room, never once asking for a kobo. But today, as the ushers reached for me to drag me out like trash, the silence in my soul finally broke. The grip on my arms was not brotherly. It was the clinical, cold force of men removing a stain from a white carpet. Sister Martha led the way, her face set in a grim mask of triumph, while two ushers, men whose names I knew because I had hand-washed their department vests just last month, pulled me from the shadows of my pillar. My heels dragged against the polished marble, the very floor I had waxed until my spine throbbed with exhaustion only 24 hours ago. "Walk, Catherine. Don't make this harder than your sin already has," Sister Martha hissed, her voice low so only I could hear the venom. As we reached the main aisle, the pastor's voice acted as a whip, driving the congregation into a frenzy. "Look at her!" Ezekiel shouted, gesturing with a hand that sported a gold ring large enough to feed a family for a year. "Look at the spirit of rebellion in motion. She thinks her silence is piety, but her presence is a loud shout against the holiness of this altar." I looked up, hoping to find a single face of mercy among the 3,000. Instead, I saw a sea of smartphones. The holy brothers and sisters were recording my humiliation, their screens glowing like miniature predatory eyes. These were people I had sat beside in Bible study. These were women I had shared my meager lunch with when they forgot theirs. Now they were whispering, pointing, and nodding in agreement with my executioner. "Shame! Jezebel! Go back to the world where you belong," a woman shouted from the second row. I recognized her, Deaconess Toyin. I had spent 3 nights sewing her daughter's wedding guest dresses for free because she claimed she was doing God's work and couldn't pay full price. Now, she was the loudest voice in the choir of condemnation. The walk felt like an eternity. Each step was a betrayal. I passed the choir stand where the singers were now humming a low, mournful tune, as if they were performing a funeral for my soul. The irony was a bitter pill in my throat. I was being cast out of the building that sat on land I technically owned, by a man whose life I had bought with my mother's final breath. "Please, Pastor," I managed to cry out, my voice cracking through the speakers as I passed a floor-standing microphone. "I have served this house with all I have. I have cleaned your floors. I have stayed in the shadows. The shadows are where you belong." Ezekiel thundered back, his face reddening. "But even the shadows are too good for a vessel that refuses to be broken. Ushers, get her out. The presence of God is being hindered by this spectacle." The crowd began to clap in a rhythmic, tribal beat, a holy applause to usher out the sinner. I felt the humid Lagos air beginning to seep through the massive oak doors as they were swung open. The ushers didn't just lead me out, they gave a final, coordinated heave. I stumbled, my sandals catching on the threshold, and I fell. I didn't fall on grass or a cushion. I fell into the red dust of the parking lot, the gravel digging into my knees. The sound of the heavy doors slamming shut behind me was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a decade of devotion being tossed into the trash. I sat there in the dirt, my navy blue dress stained with Lagos earth, listening to the muffled sound of the congregation beginning a victory song inside. I was a church outcast, a woman without a name or a future, shivering in the heat of a Sunday afternoon. I looked at the scars on my arms, glowing white against my skin, and felt a cold, hard resolve begin to form. The world thought I was finished. The church thought they had purged their cancer. But as I wiped the dust from my face, the sound of a high-performance engine, a sound I knew from the darkest corners of my memory, began to grow in the distance. The miracle was coming, but not for them. The gravel of the parking lot bit into my palms, a stinging reminder of the mercy I had just been shown. I sat there, a heap of navy blue fabric and bruised pride, while the muffled sounds of a hallelujah chorus drifted through the closed doors of the tabernacle. To the world passing by, I was just another Lagos casualty, a girl who had flown too close to the sun of the elite and gotten her wings singed. I reached down to brush the red dust from my knees, my fingers trembling. The physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache of being treated like an infectious disease by the people I had served for 1,000 days. Then the air changed. It started as a low-frequency hum that vibrated in the soles of my feet, growing into a roar that drowned out the church's sound system. A motorcade of black, armored SUVs, the kind that only the highest echelon of Nigerian power could command, screeched around the corner of the church gates. The lead vehicle, a Mercedes-AMG G-Wagon with sirens blaring, kicked up a wall of dust that coated my skin. They didn't park in the designated VIP stalls. They swerved directly toward the main entrance, coming to a halt just feet from where I sat in the dirt. The church doors flew open once more. This time, it wasn't to throw someone out. Pastor Ezekiel and his entourage of deacons practically tumbled over each other, their faces transformed from righteous anger to sycophantic glee. Ezekiel was wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief, his smile wide enough to show every gold-capped tooth. "He is here. The lion is here," the pastor shouted, ignoring me as if I were a piece of discarded litter. He stood at the top of the stairs, adjusting his suit jacket, ready to receive the man whose donations kept the tabernacle's lights burning and its private jets flying. The door of the center SUV opened. A security detail in crisp black suits stepped out first, their earpieces glinting in the sun, creating a human corridor. Then Gabriel stepped out. He looked exactly like the billboards, yet entirely different. He wore a charcoal-colored traditional agbada that flowed with a regal weight, the embroidery at the neck intricate and silver. He looked like a king, but his eyes, those deep, piercing brown eyes I had first seen through a veil of smoke and blood, were scanning the crowd with a strange, searching intensity. "Welcome, Chairman. Welcome to the house of your father," Ezekiel called out, descending the stairs with his hand outstretched. "We have been waiting for this divine moment. The congregation is at a fever pitch." Gabriel didn't take the hand. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, his gaze locking onto the sight of me sitting on the ground, my hair disheveled and my dress stained with the earth. The silence that followed was heavy, a thick, suffocating blanket that dampened the Lagos heat. "What is this?" Gabriel's voice wasn't loud, but it had the resonance of a thunderclap. "Oh, ignore that, sir," Sister Martha chirped, stepping forward with a disgusted glance my way. "Just a troublemaker we were clearing out. A sanctuary distraction. Let us go inside. The anointing is waiting for you." Gabriel's jaw tightened. He looked at the pastor, then at the ushers, and finally back to me. In that moment, the 10 years of silence between us seemed to vanish. He didn't see a Jezebel or a cleaner. He saw the girl from the bridge. He saw the fire. "Stop the service," he roared, his voice echoing off the glass walls of the cathedral. The ushers froze. Ezekiel's smile faltered, turning into a mask of confusion. Gabriel didn't wait for an explanation. He stepped away from his security detail, ignored the pastor's outstretched arms, and began to walk, not toward the altar, not toward the VIP seat, but directly toward the red dust where I sat. Every eye in the parking lot, every camera hidden behind the tinted windows of the church, and every soul peering through the open doors watched in stunned silence as the most powerful man in the city began to lower himself. The silence that descended upon the Tabernacle of Grace was unlike anything I had ever experienced in 3 years of worship. It wasn't the reverent hush of a prayer. It was the suffocating, airless vacuum of 1,000 people holding their collective breath. I stayed frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Gabriel approached me, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the very gravel that had just shredded my knees. Then the impossible happened. Gabriel Uzor, the man whose face was synonymous with African excellence, did not reach down to pull me up. Instead, he gathered the heavy, embroidered fabric of his charcoal agbada and lowered himself. His knees hit the red Lagos earth with a dull thud. He didn't care about the dust staining his pristine garments. He didn't care about the cameras or the gasping deacons. He knelt in the dirt right in front of me, his eyes searching mine with a desperation that bordered on agony. "I have spent 3,650 days looking for you," he whispered. His voice was thick, trembling with an emotion that made the pastor's theatrical sermons seem like hollow noise. He reached out, his hands steady and warm, and took my dusty, scarred hands in his. I tried to pull away, instinctively ashamed of the grime under my fingernails from scrubbing the church floors, but he gripped me tighter. He leaned forward and, in a gesture that sent a shockwave through the crowd, pressed his forehead against my knuckles. "Chairman, please." Pastor Ezekiel's voice broke the silence, high-pitched and panicked. He rushed down the steps, his hands fluttering like agitated wings. "This is a misunderstanding. This woman is a nobody, a common cleaner who was just disciplined for her lack of modesty. You shouldn't be touching her, let alone kneeling in the dirt." Gabriel didn't look up immediately. He slowly kissed the back of my hand, his eyes locked onto the faint, silver burn scars that traced a map of sacrifice up my forearm. When he finally turned his head toward the pastor, the warmth vanished. His face became a mask of cold, lethal stone. "You call her a nobody?" Gabriel's voice rose, vibrating with a power that made the ushers step back. "You call the woman who gave me my life, who stood in fire while you were likely sitting in a cushioned office, a distraction?" "Sir, we didn't know," Sister Martha stammered, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. She clutched her gold-edged Bible as if it could shield her from the billionaire's fury. She never said anything. She was just a silent member of the beautification department. We were only trying to uphold the standards of the sanctuary. "Your sanctuary is a tomb," Gabriel barked, standing up but refusing to let go of my hand. He reached into the pocket of his agbada and pulled out a small, worn piece of laminated paper, a missing persons flyer he had clearly carried for years. It featured a grainy photo of me at 19, taken just weeks before the accident. "I have donated billions to this ministry because I believed your prosperity gospel was about lifting the fallen. I thought I was honoring the angel who saved me by building a house for her God." He turned back to me, his expression softening into something raw and protective. He took his own silk handkerchief and began to wipe the red dust from my face, his touch as light as a feather. "Catherine," he said, using my name for the first time. The sound of it coming from his lips felt like a healing balm. "I didn't just come here to give a speech. I came because my investigators finally tracked the source of the anonymous donations that have been keeping this church's charity wing afloat during the pandemic. They traced it back to a small seamstress shop on the mainland." A collective gasp rippled through the deacons. I had been secretly funneling half of my meager earnings back into the church's food bank, never wanting credit. Gabriel turned to the stunned congregation peering through the doors. "You threw her out like trash today. You mocked her body and shamed her spirit. You had no idea that while you were praying for a miracle, the miracle was the one scrubbing your toilets." He looked at Ezekiel, whose mouth was hanging open. "Pastor, you asked me to dedicate the new wing of this cathedral today. But there's a truth you've overlooked in your quest for gold. A truth that is about to leave you speechless." Gabriel didn't wait for the pastor to recover his dignity. He snapped his fingers, and his lead assistant, a man in a sharp gray suit holding a slim carbon fiber briefcase, stepped forward with military precision. The crowd of deacons parted like the Red Sea, their faces now twitching with a mixture of curiosity and impending dread. Gabriel took a tablet from the assistant, the screen glowing brightly even in the harsh Lagos sun. "For 10 years, Gabriel began, his voice dropping into a cold, rhythmic cadence, the world has wondered why my company, User Tech, has such an unusual corporate structure. They call it the Lazarus Clause. They think it's a tax haven. They are wrong." He turned the screen toward Pastor Ezekiel, who was blinking rapidly, his eyes darting between Gabriel and the glowing figures on the display. "When I woke up in that hospital bed a decade ago, I had nothing but a name and a vision," Gabriel said, his hand still firmly anchored on my shoulder. "But I made a vow. I told the heavens that if I ever built an empire, it would belong to the woman who pulled me from the fire. I didn't know her name, but I knew her soul. I created a blind trust, the Catherine Covenant. Every contract I signed, every skyscraper I built, and every acre of land I acquired was funneled into that trust. I felt the ground shift beneath me. I had lived in a room with a leaking roof, skipping meals to buy fabric for my sewing business, while a billionaire had been hoarding a fortune in my name. The irony was a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. "Chairman, I don't understand," Ezekiel stammered, his voice losing its booming authority. "What does this have to do with the church's accounts? We have always been transparent with your donations." "Transparent?" Gabriel let out a short, bark-like laugh that lacked any humor. "Let's talk about transparency, Pastor. 3 years ago, you approached me to buy this 3-hectare plot in Lekki. You told me the church needed a permanent home to do God's work. I didn't just give you a donation. I instructed my trust to purchase the land and lease it back to you for a single naira a year, provided you maintain the sanctity of the mission." Gabriel swiped on the screen, and a document appeared, a land title deed with the official seal of the Lagos state government. He enlarged the section under registered owner. "The Tabernacle of Grace does not own this marble floor," Gabriel said, his voice echoing through the open doors of the sanctuary where the congregation was now spilling out, desperate to hear. "The User Foundation does not own it. I do not own it." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it became painful. Then he pointed a finger directly at the name on the screen. "Catherine Nady owns it. The woman you just dragged through the dirt. The woman you called a harlot because she has the curves of an African queen. She is your landlord. She is the legal owner of every brick, every chandelier, and every air conditioning unit in this building." A woman in the crowd let out a stifled scream. Sister Martha's Bible actually slipped from her hands, hitting the gravel with a dull thud. The deacons looked like they wanted the earth to swallow them whole. The church outcast was no longer a beggar at the gates. I was the owner of the temple. "And there's more," Gabriel continued, his eyes burning into Ezekiel's soul. "That prosperity fund you boast about? The one that pays for your fleet of cars? It is an endowment from the same trust. As of 5 minutes ago, my legal team has frozen the accounts. You see, the contract has a morality clause. It states that the fund is only accessible if the leadership treats every member with divine dignity." Gabriel looked at me, a question in his eyes, a silent offer of total, devastating power. "Catherine, they just threw you out of your own house. They shamed you in front of the world. The keys to this kingdom are in your hand. Tell me, do you want me to evict them?" The silence that followed Gabriel's question was heavy, thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the metallic tang of Lagos dust. I stood there, my hands still resting in Gabriel's, feeling the weight of the universe shift from my shoulders onto the bowed heads of the men in front of me. I looked down at my knees, the skin was broken, weeping a tiny bit of red against the navy blue of my dress, and then I looked at Pastor Ezekiel. The transformation was instantaneous and sickening. The man who, moments ago, had used his voice like a thunderbolt to strike me down, suddenly seemed to shrink. His chest, which usually puffed out with the arrogance of 1,000 men's, collapsed. He didn't just walk toward me, he stumbled. "Sister Catherine, our daughter, our most beloved daughter," Ezekiel began, his voice trembling with a terrifying, oily desperation. He reached for the hem of my dusty dress, his fingers twitching. "Please, you must understand the burden of leadership. The pressure of maintaining holiness in such a wicked city. Sometimes, our zeal clouds our discernment. There was a test. Yes, a divine test to see the strength of your character." "A test?" I whispered, the words feeling like dry leaves in my throat. I looked at Sister Martha. She was no longer the fierce gatekeeper of the sanctuary. She was frantically wiping her eyes with her gold-embroidered head wrap, her face a mask of simulated grief. "My dear, I was only following orders," Martha cried, moving toward me with her arms outstretched as if to embrace the harlot she had just shoveled into the dirt. I always knew there was a special grace upon you. I told the ushers just this morning that your silence was a sign of great spiritual depth. Let me help you up. Let me clean this dirt off your beautiful skin." She reached into her designer handbag for a lace handkerchief, but Gabriel stepped between us, a wall of charcoal silk and uncompromising steel. "Don't touch her," Gabriel warned, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You didn't want her distracting skin inside your sanctuary. Why are you so eager to touch it now?" I watched as the deacons, the same men who had looked at my body with a mixture of lust and condemnation, now looked at me with the terror of people watching their bank accounts evaporate. They weren't sorry for what they had done. They were terrified of who I had become. The power I held wasn't just in the deed to the land or the frozen bank accounts. It was the fact that I knew their true nature. I had seen them when the cameras were off. I had cleaned the mud they tracked into the Holy of Holies. "Catherine," Gabriel said, turning back to me, his eyes soft but expectant. "The legal documents are ready. My security team can have this building cleared and the locks changed in 20 minutes. We can turn this place into a hospital, a school, or a refuge for the women these men have spent years shaming. The decision is yours. Do we end this farce today?" I looked past the trembling pastor and the weeping deacons. I looked at the congregation standing in the doorway, the people who had clapped while I was being humiliated. They were waiting. The air-conditioned luxury of their Sunday ritual hung in the balance. I thought about the 10 years of struggle, the hunger, the sewing machine that hummed until 3 a.m., and the mother I had lost to give this world a man like Gabriel. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a decade: agency. I wasn't the church outcast anymore. I was the architect of their destiny. "Pastor Ezekiel," I said, my voice finally finding its strength, ringing out clearly over the hum of the idling SUVs. "You spent 20 minutes today telling this congregation that I was a cancer. You told them that my body was a snare. You treated the woman who owns your pulpit like a footstool." I took a step forward, forcing him to look at the scars on my arms. "You don't get to call this a test. You failed. And now, the church you built on the backs of the invisible ones is about to find out exactly how much a Jezebel can cost you." Ezekiel dropped to both knees, his forehead touching the gravel right where mine had been. The man of God was finally in the dirt. The red dust of Lagos clung to Pastor Ezekiel's expensive suit, a stark, earthly stain on his manufactured perfection. Seeing him there, kneeling where I had been shoved, trembling where I had sobbed, didn't give me the surge of petty joy I expected. Instead, I felt a profound, weary clarity. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, amber shadows across the parking lot, and for the first time in 10 years, the weight of the invisible girl was lifting from my shoulders. "Stand up, Pastor," I said, my voice steady, lacking the tremor of the girl who had arrived here on a crowded bus. "The dirt doesn't suit you, and your theatrics have lost their market value." He rose slowly, his eyes darting to Gabriel, then back to me, looking for a crack in my resolve. The congregation had spilled out of the sanctuary doors, a sea of silk and lace frozen in a tableau of shock. I turned away from the leadership and walked toward the top of the marble stairs, Gabriel moving silently beside me like a shadow made of iron and grace. I looked out at the thousands of faces, the people who had cheered for my exit, and I felt the spirit of my mother whispering in the Lagos wind. 10 years ago, a woman died on the third mainland bridge so that the man you call your chairman could live, I began, my voice carrying without the need for a microphone. She wasn't a billionaire. She wasn't a deaconess. She was a mother who sold bottled water in traffic. You would have called her a distraction, too. You would have told her she didn't belong in this palace of glass. A heavy, shamed silence settled over the crowd. I saw Sister Martha lower her head, her golden head wrap finally losing its defiant tilt. "I didn't stay in this church for 3 years because I needed your approval," I continued, looking directly at the choir members who had whispered about my hips. I stayed because I wanted to believe that the God my mother served lived here. But I found only a marketplace. You worship the gold on the altar, but you spit on the hands that polish it. You preach about grace, but you practice only greed. Gabriel stepped forward, his hand resting on the small of my back. The paperwork has been signed, Catherine. The User Foundation has officially transferred the deeds of this entire estate, the sanctuary, the parsonage, and the fleet of vehicles, to your personal holding company. The Tabernacle of Grace is now, legally, your living room. What is the first order of the new owner? I looked at Ezekiel, who looked as though he were awaiting a death sentence. I thought of the single room I had lived in, the hunger that had gnawed at my stomach while the church bought a new private jet. I could have burned it all down. I could have sent the bulldozers and turned this place into a parking lot. But that would be their way, not my mother's. The locks will be changed by sunset, I announced, my voice ringing with finality. Pastor Ezekiel, you and your deacons have 1 hour to vacate your offices. You will take your personal belongings and nothing more. The Prosperity Fund is dissolved. From this moment on, this building is no longer the Tabernacle of Grace. It is the Sarah Nady Memorial Center. I saw the confusion on their faces, the realization that the empire had fallen. This will be a vocational school for the girls you call outcasts, I said, a small, genuine smile finally touching my lips. It will be a hospital for those who cannot afford the seed of faith you demand. We will use the marble to build classrooms and the gold to buy medicine. The sanctuary distractions are taking over. Gabriel leaned in, a look of fierce pride in his eyes. And what about you, Catherine? I looked down at the silver scars on my arm, the price of my survival and the mark of my destiny. I'm going home, Gabriel. Not to the mainland, and not to a palace. I'm going to find the version of myself that didn't have to hide. As the ushers began to lead a shell-shocked Ezekiel away, I walked down the stairs, past the black SUVs and the stunned elite. I didn't look back at the glass cathedral. I walked toward the gate, the Lagos sun warming my face, no longer a Jezebel, no longer a cleaner, but a woman who had finally claimed the throne that had been built on her own sacrifice. The truth hadn't just left them speechless, it had set me free.
Thank you for watching today's video, guys. Now I would love you to kindly hit the subscribe button, subscribe to our channel, and also like today's video and share this video. I mean, if you want me to continue to part 2 of this video, if you enjoyed the video, I would like you to let me know in the comment section. And I asked in the beginning of the video that you should rate this particular story in a scale of 1 to 10. Is it a 1 over 10 for you? Is it a 2 over 10, 3 over 10, 5 over 10, or 10 over 10? Let me know in the comment section, because this will help me to bring more better and excellent story for you guys. Thank you, and I'll see you in my next video, guys. Bye.